Hello everyone, my name is Abdul Gani Khan and welcome back to the KSG Current Affairs Update. Today we are going to talk about the RERA Act, and why we are covering this topic today because recently the Ministry of Housing and the Urban Affairs is in the process of reviewing the functioning of the RERA Act 2016. Now first of all we try to understand what is RERA. The RERA stands for the Real Estate Regulation and Development Act, and it is a significant legislation enacted by the Government of India in 2016. The primary objective of this act is to regulate the real estate sector and promote the transparency, accountability and efficiency in the real estate transactions. The RERA aims to protect the interest of the home buyers and promote fair practices in the real estate industry. But what was the need of this act? Why we brought this legislation? Basically, the growth of the real estate sector was struggling with number of issues. Issues like the lengthy approval process for the project clearance, lack of clear land titles, prevalence of black money, sometimes divergence of funds received by the developer towards the more lucrative projects. Construction of work come to standstill or the developer has left without completing the project. Sometimes developer change the layout or building plan after the purchase, and of course the legal dispute, it had to be settled in the court. To address all these issues and also to secure the largest investment sector, regulation of the real estate sector has been under discussion since 2013, and the RERA Act eventually came into being in 2016. The RERA Act also created the accountability. Actually, before the enactment of the RERA, the real estate and housing sector was largely unregulated, with the consequences that the consumer were unable to hold the builder and the developer accountable. There was another act called the Consumer Protection Act of 1986, but this act was inadequate to address the need of the home buyer. Therefore, RERA was introduced to ensure greater accountability toward the consumer, to reduce the fraud and the delays, and to set up the fast-track dispute resolution mechanism. Now we will try to see few major important provisions of the RERA Act. First of all, this act established a state-level regulatory authority, that is the Real Estate Regulatory Authority (RERA). The act provides for the state government to establish more than one regulatory authority. Another very important provision of this act is to establish a real estate appellate tribunal. Now, the decision of the RERA can be appealed in this tribunal. There is also a provision for mandatory registration. All the projects with a plot size of minimum 500 square meter or 8 apartments need to be registered with the regulatory authority. There is also a provision for the deposit. Depositing 70% of the funds collected from buyer in a separate escrow bank account for construction of that project only. It means the constructor cannot use that money for any other project. There is also provision for the liability. Developer's liability to repair the structural defect for 5 years. And there is also a penal interest in the case of default. For both, for the promoter and the buyer are liable to pay an equal rate of interest in the case of any default from the either side. There is also a provision for cap on the advance payment. A promoter cannot accept more than 10% of the cost of the plot, apartment or a building as an advance payment or an application fees from a person without first entering into an agreement for sale. There is also a provision for the punishment. So basically there is a imprisonment for up to 3 years for a developer and up to 1 year in the case of agents and a buyer for a violation of an order of an appellate tribunal or a regulatory authority. If we talk about the implementation of this RERA Act, all the state and UT have notified the rules under the RERA Act except the state of Nagaland. Recently, the government of India is reviewing the functioning of the RERA Act for making it more uniform and also to address all the existing challenges with respect to the real estate sector. Thank you for listening to us. All the best.